from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. We have one tale for you tonight about a man lost in another dimension, searching desperately for a way back home. Our story this evening comes to us from Joshua Daniels. Joshua Daniels is an aspiring author who is trying his very best. This story comes to us from Richmond, Virginia, where JD lives with his wonderful wife and their cold, unfeeling cat. When Joshua isn't writing, he is staring at a blank screen trying to write. When that's over, he enjoys listening to a spooky podcast, reading fantasy books, or playing a mean game of D&D. He can be found on Instagram at Josh_out_loud. Children of the night, join me for Joshua Daniels' The Beyonder, a Tales to Terrify original.
I tried to focus on the music. The old jazz standard drifted through the fog around me, forming a thin bubble of human influence in an otherwise lifeless world. It was music made for daydreaming. My mind drifted, picturing my wife and daughter dancing in our kitchen back home. Even in daydreams, I stood outside, looking in through a window, my hand pressing against the glass, my breath forming fog on the translucent surface. It was easier to imagine them that way. If I tried to picture myself beside them, I'd be forced to acknowledge that I had forgotten what their voices sounded like. I recentered myself in the present. Condensation from my breath had formed inside my helmet, blurring my already limited vision. The only light source was the warm glow of the lantern hanging from my side. The instrument illuminated clouds of gray dust that swirled around me like I was wandering through a colorless, slow-moving sandstorm. The jazz music was interrupted by a series of harsh beeps from my radar. I plucked the instrument from my belt and followed it towards a mound of loose earth rising from the ash-colored ground. The exposed parts of my target glowed with faint blue light, turning the dense dust particles swirling around it into otherworldly lightning bugs. "Battery in sight," I spoke, my voice muffled in the helmet. I bent over the device and brushed my glove across the dirt. As the dust came away, I unearthed more than just the battery. A thick fabric and a few brass bulbs became visible. There was a suit here. It resembled antique diver's gear with pipes that carried oxygen into a brass helmet. I was wearing the exact same suit. The only differences were revealed as I kept digging. Its sleeves were burned, and time had rusted and eaten away the metal facets. The chest and legs were stained with some oily substance, making the ash cling to them. The helmet was mostly buried, but I could see cracks in the glass that would have otherwise kept an airtight seal. I reminded myself that worlds like these played with the senses. I was likely only imagining what I thought I had found, but still, vulgar curiosity took hold. I began uncovering the buried helmet. I brought my lantern to the glass and illuminated the yellowing bones and the stray gray hairs of a body. My hot breath grew faster and clouded my viewport. A voice came over the radio. "Tom, do you have the battery?" I took a moment to collect myself before I spoke. "I have it," I stuttered out. "Tarly, there's a body here." "A human?" Tarly asked. "I think so," I answered. There was a pause where only jazz music could be heard. "Return to base and we can recalibrate with this new information. I will send some bots to scout for doorways in the area." Tarly spoke gently, trying to temper my expectations. This had been the closest we had come to finding another human. I guess Tarly suspected I might do something stupid, like waste my air running around trying to find where the body had come from. But his caution was unnecessary. Looking at the body didn't make me hopeful. Instead, it was like I was looking into my future. Like somehow, after years of searching for a way home, I found where my search would lead me. Would I end up as a decaying body partially buried in an unknown world? I pried the gloved hand from the battery and hoisted it under my arm. With a limited air supply, it wasn't smart to waste my time reburying the body, but I did it anyway. It was worth the effort to feel human. Plus, I would want someone to do the same for me. Once I was done, I set my course for the bunker. Tarly's voice came again. "Scouts have spotted movement in 24-6R. Consider an alternate path home." "Noted," I replied. I retraced my steps back to the doorway. When I first entered this world and saw the door and surrounding relics, I thought it might have been inhabited. But after more tests, the place proved to be as lifeless and stark as all the others. The doorway was the only visible structure. I had a terrible thought that maybe I had found Earth, and this was all that was left, the stone doorway, the last vestige of home. Maybe nuclear war or some other horrific event had reduced Earth to swirling gray dust. Don't think like that. I pushed the thought aside. The hope of finding a way back was the only thing keeping me moving. I couldn't let it go out. I pushed the door open and stepped into another world. There was no fanfare to it. There was no rush of energy or feeling of disorientation. I was simply somewhere else. Interdimensional travel, as simple as a step. I was in a hallway that expanded ever onward in both directions, a different dimension. Wood paneling covered the bottom half of the walls, and faded yellow wallpaper with red decorative patterns lined the top. I was careful not to look too closely at the pattern. The last time I returned to my senses far down the hallway, where the red pattern started to look like bloodstains, and the yellow emerged from beneath it like teeth. I reached for my small notebook from my suit's pocket. A photo fluttered out as I did. I bent over and picked it up delicately in my gloved hand. The photo was all that I had left from Earth. It was of my daughter, Phoebe, and my wife, Jane, sitting in a photo booth. I had that glass wall feeling again, the longing for a place no longer within reach. I wondered where they were then. Phoebe would be 14, assuming I had been keeping accurate time. Had her mom remarried? On Earth, was I a missing person? Was I presumed dead? Or did everyone think I'd abandoned my family and run off? I left Earth through a doorway in an abandoned home set for demolition. It was in an old shack in the mountains. The property and all the surrounding area had been bought up by a rich family looking to build a luxury hotel. With the ivy winding around it, I guessed the building hadn't been occupied for years. Still, it was my job to make sure it was clear. I didn't want to catch some poor squatter unaware. I doubted we would need a bulldozer to take the building down. Given its creaking and the cracks in its foundation, a sturdy wind could have done the trick. The door was on the second story. From the yellow peeling stickers on the doorframe and the bits of crayon still visible on the walls, I imagined it would open into a child's room. The door was one of the few still attached at the hinges. I reached for the handle and, in doing so, sealed my fate. It was like I had opened an airplane mid-flight. The pressure changed and I was suddenly pulled into a vacuum. I held onto the door. Below me I could hear the churning of a raging sea. There were other sounds, ungodly, unworldly sounds, something like a whale song, but deeper and wider, as if it could only belong to a creature so colossal it could swallow the entire decrepit house whole. I hung suspended, pulled by raging wind and anchored only by a door with rust-bitten hinges. They creaked and snapped. I was swallowed by a dark sea of substance that tasted like vinegar. The liquid fought against me. All I could see were black shapes against a black sky. I was drowning. I couldn't breathe. When I closed my eyes, I thought I was dead. When I woke up, I was a castaway, lost on the shore of another world. That's where Tarly found me. The door was gone when I woke. Whether it was destroyed when I ripped it off its hinges or when the building was torn down, it didn't really matter. All that mattered was that it was gone. I had been trying to find a way home ever since. I often replayed that moment in my mind, screaming from behind my glass wall, telling myself not to open that door. I held my journal to the lantern and flipped the page to a web of lines and numbers that served as a map between dimensions. With movement in 24/6R, I needed to chart a different path. There were dangerous things out there. The beings in these places ranged from strange to unfathomable. We called them Beyonders. I had only seen a handful, but each had left an impression. I had seen a statue of petrified wood that moved and rasped out in a grating voice that it had seen my death. In a world of mirrors, I saw a creature with my face that spoke in my voice and told me that I was the Beyonder, and that it was the human lost between worlds. I saw a horned being with 100 hands and 1,000 eyes that turned all my dreams into nightmares. I plotted a new course. I walked for hours down the hallway, averting my gaze from the pattern along the wall. The dimension rang with the sound of my feet hitting the hollow wooden floor and the drifting jazz music. I reached a stark black door and stepped through. This door led into a world with a red sky. Medieval wooden buildings jutted from a rocky, almost Martian landscape. The door spit me out of a creaking watchtower. The village was inhabited by unmoving plastic mannequins dressed like medieval peasants. The whole dimension was a carefully positioned diorama. Still, something about how the plastic beings were posed and the angles of their blank faces made me wonder if these creatures had been always made of plastic. I moved on. The next door led me to the black forest, where tall ebony trees rose like skyscrapers from the ground. As I walked, I saw ethereal golden lights drifting around me. I already knew what they were. Each light came from my own lantern. Past versions of myself held up each light. Looking through this forest was like looking through time, with its army marching after images. At one end, I could see myself as a lost young man. Beside it, I could see a determined version of myself, setting out in a much cleaner version of the same suit I wore. I added a tire after image of myself trudging back to base camp. I ignored the version of myself yelling and pounding his fist on the ground, crying out for one of the ghost-like after images to help him. I had been him already. I knew no help was coming. I stepped past him and into a cellar door built into the roots of a giant black tree. It led into Tarly's bunker. Music floated around the corners of the sprawling underground concrete complex. The walls were lined with bookcases full of supplies and strange trinkets from across the dimensions. A machete hung against the wall. Its blade was stained with the black blood of otherworldly plants. I passed 2 decommissioned robots as I walked inside. Both were human-shaped, only smaller. The first was an older model, with a blockish head made of a strange wood-patterned metal. A year ago, it had been a victim of a Beyonder. Ever since, the bot could only power up long enough to spit out a series of incomprehensible numbers. 13, 4, 67, 58. There was something almost uncannily human about Tarly's bots. Each time the broken thing bolted upwards, it would cling to my body, wrapping its steel arms in my clothing, reciting its indecipherable code in a warning or a prayer. Once the numbers had escaped, the robot would collapse inert on the bunker floor. It was unsettling. The second bot was a larger model of Tarly's design. The faceplate looked human, with blinking eyes and moving mouth, but it didn't move right. The eyes didn't blink regularly enough, its mouth moved too rigidly, and its voice fluctuated like human, but lacked warmth and emotion. I was almost happy when the thing was decommissioned. It had been exploring a new dimension when it suddenly began to decay. Tarly got it back through the door before it was destroyed, but its humanoid face had become rust-marred and jagged. One of its legs collapsed, and most of its hardware had aged hundreds of years in a second. I moved past the robot graveyard, towards my locker, where I stripped out of my suit. The room opened into a cluttered living space lit only by sickly overhead lights. "Welcome home, Tom," said one of Tarly's bots as I entered. "Do you have the battery?" I nodded, and the robot gestured for me to follow. We moved down a series of dark corridors and a spiraling staircase. The bottom of the stairs emerged into a wide chamber with arcing ceilings. In the center of the room was the source of the music, a meticulously cared-for record player. It sat, solitary, on a table. Beside it was a desk housing a mess of radio equipment. Behind it, a large metal frame filled the rest of the vast room. Tarly was inside the frame, held aloft by a series of metal rods and tubes. He looked out from behind a wall of glass. I often wondered if Tarly had been something else before he was the machine. There were organic elements to him. He had thin hairs growing from flaps of pink skin around his head. The wrinkled flesh of his torso was marked with purple stretch marks. Most of his face was riveted metal, but his left eye was startlingly human. It was a dull hazel brown. It didn't move or focus on anything in the room. It looked forward, fixed on the record player, locked in an expression of desperation. I looked away. Tarly couldn't move or speak independently. He used his machines to interact with the world around him. And he slept. When he did, each of his robots powered down and hung lifeless. The whole bunker became quiet, with no buzzing sounds of automation. It was the only time his jazz music didn't fill the bunker. One of Tarly's less humanoid bots moved to my side. He held out a glass of something dark and strong. "Care for a drink?" I took it. "This battery is too big for another scout," I stated as the bot took it from me. I sipped the drink. "This one isn't for a robot," Tarly corrected. "I'm building something new, something that should greatly help the mission." I nodded, letting the dark liquor burn my throat as I swallowed it. Tarly always went on about his mission, his pointless, endless goal of charting the dimensions. I was his reluctant accomplice. It might have driven me crazy if it wasn't my best shot at finding Earth. "You did well today, Tom," a robot said. "Would you like to sit and listen to a record with me?" "No." "Has the human you saw today harmed your mood?" I ignored the question. "With what you found today, we are closer now than ever," Tarly reassured me. It was a lie. I wanted to believe that somehow that skeleton in a suit was the last horror I would see before stepping foot on Earth again, but I didn't. That body could have come from anywhere. It could have been a figment of my own imagination. For all I knew, that world could have been filled with bodies that looked just like mine. I was just as lost and alone as when I entered the bunker 7 years before. I set down my glass. "Can I get you anything else?" "No, Tarly. I just want to be alone for a bit." Tarly spoke again as I walked away. "No one truly wants to be alone, Tom." I couldn't sleep that night. The rusted, almost human face of Tarly's decommissioned robot was staring at me from across the room. The rest of the bots were hanging lifeless. Tarly must have been sleeping. I got out of bed. I drifted down the bunker's corridors. I wondered if there was earth or sky above the droning yellow lights, or if this entire world was a maze of infinite corridors. I could have spent the last 7 years trying just to map the bunker. I would be just as close to finding home if I had. I shrugged off the bitter thought. There was a place I went on nights when I couldn't sleep. There was a mural on the wall there. It was the only piece of art I had found in this dimension. Dark charcoal depicted a being standing alone atop a mountain. The vastness of the mural, in comparison to the size of the figure, made him look small and isolated. I thought Tarly might have painted the mural, but his machines moved too rigidly for the task. Instead, I imagined that someone like me had created the faded picture. Someone lost in this lifeless place long ago. Just imagining that there was someone else in my situation out there, in another time or place, alleviated some of the pain of being alone. There was a door across from the mural. I had passed it for years. It had always remained locked, but stood slightly ajar that day. I had a feeling that I shouldn't go in. Like if I did, I would be sucked into a world I couldn't return from. But I could see more of the concrete bunker on the other side. This wasn't a portal. I pushed it open and stepped inside. One of Tarly's bots was in the room, bent over at its waist in a mockery of sleep. It held a leather-bound book in its motionless arms. The room spanned as far as I could see and was filled with filing cabinets. They lined the walls and stood in rows dividing the chamber. It seemed absurd that such a large room could ever reach capacity. But the maze of filing cabinets was insufficient to house the vast number of files. Pages of research notes overflowed from the cabinets and piled on top of every available surface. It didn't make sense. I picked up a page at random, notes depicting a world I had never heard of. Tarly often took notes on the dimensions we explored, but his research could fit into a handful of pages. There were thousands of documents here, hundreds of thousands. The dimensions I had explored couldn't even account for a fraction of the visible files, let alone what was in the cabinets. How many worlds had Tarly found before we ever met? How long had he been there? I turned back towards the inert bot and took the book from its arms. I thought it might be a ledger, but as I opened the book, I discovered it was a journal. An entry on the first page read, "The year, by the reckoning of the All-Worlds Pact, is 1858, and I have been given an incredible task. My existence has been devoted and altered to accomplish a great mission. I am to become an interdimensional pioneer. With the technology and resources extended to me by my superiors, I will go through the doors of the multiverse and chart unfathomable dimensions. I, Tarly Tarden, will bring light and understanding to the worlds of darkness and confusion." My heart sank. I flipped forward through the pages and kept reading. "The year is 2356. I have lost contact with my superior. In their last missive, they declared an abandonment of the project, citing diminished faith in the worthwhile discovery and increased threats to the homeland. Still, my mission remains my only desire. I wonder if that was always the case. I cannot understand if my drive to continue derives from my passion or the code programmed into my brain. I sent a bot to return home, but the door has been destroyed. I am alone. My mission persists." The handwriting wasn't mechanical. It was fluid, organic, human. The margins of the journal started to become cluttered by charcoal drawings. It was Tarly who had created the mural. Tarly had once been just like me. I flipped ahead to where the robotic print replaced the handwriting. The year, by my closest estimation, is 4354. I cannot stop myself from continuing my mission. I am a prisoner to it. Each day I work towards a goal that can never be reached. I was not created to exist this long. I can no longer leave my charging station. I have altered it to keep myself alive. Even as I built the structure that now houses my form, I understood I was creating a cage. I had to build it. Death would be contrary to my mission. He wanted a way out. He wanted to be allowed to die. Would he feel relief if I released him? You cannot kill Tarly. He'd be left all alone. The thought filled me with muddy shame. I thought of Tarly, suspended in his machine for thousands of years, mapping hostile world after hostile world, his implanted code forcing him forward, while his organic mind felt the crippling solitude of such an existence. It would be a mercy to kill him. 13, 4, 67, 58. I recognized the number when I saw it. It was printed across the top of a page of world notes. It was the code Tarly's decommissioned robot had desperately recited to me. I would have undoubtedly missed the file if the code had not been so burned into my mind. I stepped closer. The text was written in a robot's consistent print. Green swath, inhabited. The world bears so much similarity to my world. It shares our language and many of our technologies. It makes me long for home. The inhabitants here call themselves human. I should not return. It would only interfere with my mission. Something hard formed in my stomach. How long had this page been here? How long had Tarly been keeping this from me? Had he known how to get to Earth this entire time? I felt my body growing hot. Underneath this note, there was more text written in a fresher ink. This is Tom's homeworld. I will not be alone again. He will stay, and I will keep him alive until my mission is complete. Rage boiled as I thought of the years I had spent aching for my life on Earth. I had been living as a prisoner, a hostage, a plaything to some lonely mechanical horror. My body shook with rage, but burning underneath it was hope. I had been nurturing such a small spark of it for years that I forgot what it had felt like when it burned. It felt like my family was closer now than they had been for years, like the glass wall I had been trapped behind was beginning to shatter. In my hands, I held directions to my dimension. I started towards the locker, picking up the machete as I went. I wouldn't spend another moment in this prison. "Where are you going, Tom?" The sound of me pulling on my suit must have woken Tarly. "I'm going home, Tarly," I said, brushing the bot aside and striding towards the bunker door. "You cannot go home," Tarly Robot stated, confused. I ignored it. "You don't know the way," it tried. "But you do," I shot back. There was a moment of hesitation in the bot. "Don't you, Tarly?" I hissed through gritted teeth as I raised the crumpled proof in my hand. The bot reached for it. I stepped back and leveled the machete at it. I bared my teeth inside my helmet like a wild animal. "Please, Tom, you cannot leave," Tarly begged. "Watch me." I turned and stepped towards the door. The robot grabbed my shoulder. I turned and knocked it into its back with a shove. It grabbed hold of me and pulled me down with it. The glass of my helmet spiderwebbed as it collided with the bunker floor. I grabbed one of the machine's arm. 7 years, I screamed at it as I hacked into it with a blade. 7 years you've kept me here. The robot beneath me squirmed. I grabbed its head and slammed it into the ground repeatedly. With each thud, its movements became more choppy. Black oil started to leak out of its body, and sparking electricity caused the oil to burn. I could hear other robots moving up the stairs. Creaking sounds from across the room drew my attention first. The rusted human shape in the corner began to rise. With one functioning leg, it scraped across the floor towards me. Tarly's words spilled out of its grating voice box. "I cannot let you leave, Tom." Below me, the burning robot jerked itself in an odd movement. I looked down and saw it grab the file with its burning hands. "No!" I screamed. I pulled myself to my feet and patted the document to extinguish the flame. The rusted robot grabbed my shoulder and yanked me away. "I'll kill you!" I yelled as the page burned in my hands. I threw myself backward, crushing the robot beneath me. I grabbed the machete and cleaved it through the neck of the rusty machine. I pressed the blade into where the battery was housed, leaning down with my full weight until the light behind its eyes went out. But it was too late. I grabbed for the ruined pages, but they were ashes. I felt cold, like something burning inside me had been snuffed out. 2 more robots reached the fire. They tried to speak to me, but I couldn't hear them. My mind was too busy trying to remember the sound of my daughter's voice. It had felt so close only seconds ago. One of the robots approached. I threw myself into it and knocked it into the fire. I buried the machete into the next and broke the blade off in its battery. They felt almost human as I cut into them. My sleeves burned. Tarly's robots tried to beg me to stop, but I felt no empathy for the cold machines. Instead, I felt only the cold feeling of an impenetrable glass wall. A few bots tried to run, but none escaped. I moved through the concrete bunker till my suit was coated in red-black oil. I watched myself slaughter them, as though I were a machine removed from my body, unwavering in my mission. I kicked one of Tarly's bots down the winding stairs and into his chamber. I stomped down onto its faceplate when I reached where it had fallen. Something in my foot snapped. I didn't stop until the metal of my boot shattered the robot's power source. I worked forward with a limp. The last robot stood in front of the record player, guarding it like it was a child. "Tell me how to get home," I demanded. "That was the only way, Tom. I do not know how to get to your home now. Please stop this." I stepped forward and pushed the robot. It clattered into the table behind it, smashing the record player. I stomped my broken foot onto the player, shattering it. "Tom," the robot begged as I dragged it across the room. "Please, Tom, listen to me." I pulled the robot in front of Tarly's metallic shell. "Where's the battery?" Tarly didn't respond. This is your last robot, Tarly. If I kill it, you're trapped. Where is the battery?" The robot pointed towards a door at the end of the room. I dragged my hostage to it and threw open the door. Inside was the battery. Bathed in its cold blue light was an apparatus that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Metal pipes and cords dangled down, waiting to receive its host. It was a machine exactly like Tarly's. This is what he had been building. How long had he been planning to trap me here? How long had he been lying about helping me get home? It didn't matter now. There was no going home. I dragged the robot and the battery back in front of Tarly's shell. I lifted the battery in both hands and brought it down into the head of Tarly's final mouthpiece. "Tom," the machine below me sparked twice. "Please? Kill me?" I crushed the robot's head again and again until it stopped moving. The body suspended in the machine let out a pained noise. Its one organic eye was crying. There was no way of ever leaving the trap it had built now. Strange, guttural sounds escaped the suspended thing. "Crow, it tried to say. I lifted my cracked helmet to examine it. Its organic eye was looking at me pleadingly. I felt nothing. No. It took hours to reach the colorless world. The toxic air mingled with my suit's dwindling oxygen. There was no music as I walked. In the distance, there was a pinprick of blue light. I walked until my broken foot could no longer hold my weight. I crawled until breathing became too difficult. I dragged myself forward until I reached it. The light was cold and blue. It came from a battery that was jumping from the gray earth. I wrapped my gloved hand around it and waited to be buried.
That was Joshua Daniels' The Beyonder, as read by Seth Williams. Seth Williams is the managing editor here at Tales to Terrify. He has narrated stories for Tales to Terrify, Far-Fetched Fables, and Starship Sofa. When not day jobbing, he enjoys listening to fiction podcasts and audio drama. He shares his life with an amazing partner, dog, and a cat. Thank you, Seth. Well, children of the night, the hour is late, and we've run out of tales to tell. For now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D. Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales, too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we confront the specters of the past with more Tales to Terrify.